electricity, so if you can't hear me, just speak up, and I'll try to be louder. I'm used to using the mic. We gather together today as the dear family and friends of Betty Unger. As we mourn her loss, we also celebrate the full, rich life she led. Death has taken our beloved Betty. Friends grieve in their darkened world. In their silence, there is lamentation. In their tears, there is loneliness. Lost in their sorrow, may they find the presence of loving friends. Hear them, O God, and be with them. For her love that united us in life and which death cannot sever. For her companionship, which we shared along life's path, and which still continues through the tenderness of memory. For the gifts of her heart and her mind, which brought us joy and happiness, and now become a precious heritage of the Spirit. For all these and more, God, we give you our praise. In his sorrow, Job cried out, Adonai Natan, v'nai lokach, Yehi Shem Adonai Mevarach. God has given, God has taken away. Blessed be the name of God. An ancient people, we're well acquainted with grief and with the valley of shadows. Death and sorrow not strangers to us. Yet the centuries have taught us that a good name endures beyond the grave. And there is strength in faith. With Job we say, Adonai Natan, God you have given. You gave us a loved one who will not be forgotten. For all was good and enduring in her life, we offer the deepest thanks of our hearts. Proverbs 31. Eshet chayo mi yimsa, v'rechok mipni mikra. A woman of valor who can find. She is more precious than fine pearls. Her husband trusts in her, and so he lacks nothing. She does him good, never harm, all the days of her life. She perceives that her labor is rewarding. Her candle burns on into the night. She reaches out to those in need and extends her hand to the poor. She is clothed in strength and dignity, and she faces the future cheerfully. She speaks with wisdom. The law of kindness is on her lips. Her family rise up and bless her. They sing her praises. Many daughters have done valiantly, but you excel them all. A poem entitled, My Hereafter. Do not come when I am dead, to sit beside a low green mound, or bring the first daffodils, because I love them so. For I shall not be there. You cannot find me there. I will look up at you from the eyes of little children. I will bend to meet you in the swaying boughs of bud-thrilled trees and caress you with the passionate sweep of storm-filled winds. I will give you strength in your upward tread of everlasting hills. I will cool your tired body in the flow of the river. I will warm your work-glorified hands to the glow of the winter fire. I will soothe you into forgetfulness, to the drop of the rain on the roof. I will speak to you out of the rhymes of the masters. I will dance with you in the lilt of the violin and make your heart leap with the bursting cadence of the organ. I will flood your soul with the flaming radiance of the sunrise and bring you peace in the tender rose and gold of the after sunset. All these have made me happy. They are part of me, and I shall become a part of them. Adonai ro'i lo efsar, bina desha yar bitzeni, amei menachot yanachaleni. Please join me in the familiar words of the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters, and restoreth my soul. He guides me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord Baal Shem Tov, the Hasidic Rebbe, observed that there are 3 ways to mourn. The first is with tears, the second is with silence, and the third is with song. When we mourn someone truly beloved, we experience all 3. Tears at first, then silence as our grief settles more deeply, and finally song as we're able to celebrate the memories we hold deep in our hearts. So today is a time for tears as we say our final goodbyes to Betty. We remember Betty in our own way. Ellen and Bert, Jim and Kelly, you remember Betty as your beloved mother. Bill, Dan and Hannah, Stephen, Tyler, Chase, and Griffin, you all remember Betty as a devoted grandmother. And Betty was adoring great-grandmother to Sivan and Ram. Throughout her life, Betty was a caring sister and sister-in-law to Helen and Rube, Jack and Elizabeth, Eudice and Sid, Cyril and Freddie, Edna and Randy, and a dear aunt to her many nieces and nephews. Betty was born here in Cleveland on June 11, 1925, to Sam and Rose Gordon. She was the youngest of her 3 siblings. Betty grew up on the west side of Cleveland, where they were one of the only Jewish families. Betty's father owned a wholesale dry goods store on West 6th Street. They moved to University Heights when Betty was in high school, and she graduated from Heights High. Even while living on the west side of Cleveland, Betty's family was very active and involved in Park Synagogue, then called the Cleveland Jewish Center. Both sides of her family had been members for generations. Betty was a beautiful girl, the one every boy wanted to date. But she waited for her high school and Park Synagogue sweetheart, Stanford, while he went off to World War II. Stan was stationed in the South Pacific in Japan, and they wrote letters to each other every day. Betty attended Flora Stone Mather College, and when Stan returned, they were married on March 31st, 1947 at Park Synagogue by Betty's dear cousin, Rabbi Armin Cohen. They had a fairy tale romance. 1 year later, Stuart was born. He was profoundly disabled, and they didn't expect him to survive, yet alone live 50 years. It was Betty's love and care that kept him alive. She kept him at home as long as possible. 4 years later, Ellen was born. Soon, Stuart went to live in custodial nursing care at Mom Wright's nursing home. Betty was still devoted to him, visiting often. When Stuart passed away, Rabbi Cohen gave a beautiful eulogy, praising Betty's care and devotion to her son. When Ellen was young, Betty went back to school to get a master's in special education. She wanted to help families in need and children with disabilities. This became the focus of her life. Betty's mission was to work to get services for the severely disabled. Betty and Stan helped to establish the Cerebral Palsy Association of Cleveland. Betty and Stan became very active at Park Synagogue. Betty taught Sunday school and was involved in sisterhood. They started the Couples Club. Betty supported Stan in his work as the Men's Club president and planning the Forum series. Betty and Stan hosted the many important guests who came to speak at Park. Yaakov Agam, Eleanor Roosevelt, Roberta Peters. They had wonderful pictures with these celebrities, and sometimes Ellen could just sneak in. Ellen observed and listened to these distinguished guests. She learned people of real content, had great humility. When Cantor Danto came to Park Synagogue, Betty immediately invited him and his family over for Shabbat dinner. They hit it off and became fast friends right away. Soon after, his wife Ada became very ill and died. While Ada was sick, Betty cared for one of their daughters, Denise. Denise came to live with them, and Betty became her surrogate mother. To this day, Denise still sent Betty a bouquet of flowers every Mother's Day. Ada said Denise would bring them good luck, and she did. Betty was caring. She was always a giver. When someone was sick, Betty made pots of soup. She was there. In a crisis, she went into action and provided whatever was needed. But Betty was waiting for something. She knew her family wasn't complete. Ellen remembers it was when Denise was living with them that they got the long-awaited call from Jewish Family Services. The call they had waited for years. A baby boy would be arriving tomorrow. They ran to the maid company and bought a crib and clothes, and the next day they brought Jimmy home. It was the last night of Hanukkah, and much of the family learned about Jimmy's arrival when they showed up at a Hanukkah party that night. During those life-changing years, the Unger and Danto families became very entwined, remaining very close for the rest of their lives. Betty embraced people. She loved her friends' children as her own. Many of them called her Aunt Betty, and she was always there for her friends and family in times of need. Betty was very artistic. She could make art from anything. She was a master crafter and collector. She collected everything from paper clips to seashells to interesting paper. Betty created beautiful flower arrangements and wrapped spectacular presents. She drew and did sculpture. Betty's sense of creativity was intuitive. She was always curious and loved to explore and travel. And Betty was madly in love with her 6 grandchildren. When they were young, she loved to take them to explore, to go on field trips to the zoo, or to show them where her father's shop used to be. Betty took Ellen's family to Florida many times, and Betty always wanted to see the Macy's Day Parade, so one year Ellen and Bert took her to New York. Even at the end of her life, when Betty could no longer speak, she still loved Jewish music. Her family would come and sing with her. But Betty's favorite singer was probably her great-granddaughter, Sivan. Betty enjoyed singing along with Sivan as she learned her ABCs. And so today is a time for tears. We're saddened by the loss of Betty, but we learned so much from her, especially how to care for one another. Let these tears serve to strengthen and uphold you as a family. There's a story in our tradition about a rabbi who once passed an old woman planting trees. Old woman, he called, "Why are you planting those trees? You'll never live to see them blossom." But the woman replied, "My ancestors planted trees, not for themselves, but for us, that we might enjoy their shade and their fruit. I too do the same for all those who come after me." Betty planted an orchard for each one of us, an orchard filled with devotion and with love, and these will always be here for us. We must be grateful that we were able to share in Betty's life. Tomorrow there'll be fewer tears, more silence. As the Baal Shem Tov noted, it will be a time for pondering, a time for contemplation. Betty will become a greater part of our characters and our beings as we integrate the memories and the values she taught us into our own selves. But finally, there'll come a time for song. The time will come when we can celebrate Betty. We'll recall all that we learned from her and how she touched each of our lives. May she rest in peace. Zecher Sidacha Livracha. May the memory of Betty Unger be a blessing. Amen. Now I'd like to invite Dan to come forward to share some personal words about his grandmother.
Starting off well. Thank you, Rabbi Marcus. Those are actually some things I did not know and hadn't heard before, so that was very special. My grandmother had a certain way with words, a tendency to say things sometimes over and over again, strange context for using them, and she had a tone that I would sometimes call, or I would refer to as a certain melancholy, maybe even foreboding, but with a deep, intense passion and care. Shortly after my wife Hannah and I moved to Cleveland, we took Grandma Betty out to lunch, and I don't have any recollection of where we went to lunch, but I do remember very distinctly we were driving back from lunch, and on the way we passed by the cemetery on Chagrin and Richmond, and as we're passing by the gate, she says, looks at me very seriously, "There's the family." And I remember Hannah and I looked at each other and said, that's true, but it had a certain melancholy forebodingness to it. And I think that was Hannah's introduction to my grandmother. She had a certain tendency to use words over and over again. The word conflagration came up a lot in her conversations. You know, I don't use that word very often, but it was used very often with her. My brother reminded me that she often used the word germ in various contexts. And frankly, for my brothers and I, it was always a little bit of a sense of humor and fascination, some of the things that she would say. I think it tells you something about someone's character if they're using certain phrases or ways of talking on a regular basis. On the one hand, it might be an anxious habit, maybe a little bit obsessive. You might even call it a neurotic behavior every once in a while. And certainly in the Unger, Gordon, Schultz, Singerman family, there's more than a few of us who have a little bit of neurotic behaviors. I will look no farther than myself. But I think, again, if you take a step back, it tells you something very special about Grandma's character. If you spend a lot of time with Grandma, various things would strike you, for sure. She was certainly very knowledgeable and caring. That was obvious. But the thing that really sticks out to me, and I will carry with me, is that she was focused on even the very smallest details and preserving intricate, detailed memories of the who, what, when, where, why, and how of her life and those of the lives of the people around her. It wasn't just, big ticket memories and things like that. It was little things like how should one fold their clothes? It had to be done just right. What were the very precise symptoms of a specific illness, whether it be her own or somebody else's? The intricacies and mistakes on a new construction project. This really happened. Right after the new Joann Fabrics went up at Cedar and Warrensville, she made a point of telling me that it was a great store, but they had really screwed up that parking garage. And there was a lot of problems with it. And you know what? She was right. It was more than that. It was her family. Who was she related to? Cousins, 3, 4 times removed. She knew it all. She knew everybody. Other things. Yard sites. Whose yard site had just passed. Small things, little differences, details that most other people would forget, not notice. Those were the things that she seemed to focus on most. Growing up, when we would go out to dinner with Grandma, it was a very atypical situation that we would go to the restaurant, sit at a table, and not move at least once, if not twice. And why? It was usually a draft, some other minor inconvenience. Something was really bothering her. Other people didn't notice it, but to her, it was a big issue, and we had to move. If a plate was brought out with a small chip, she would notice the small chip. It was perfectly usable in every other way, but that could be a breeding ground for germs, or it could be another problem. And she didn't want the chip. It had to go back. It had to be just right. When I came to visit Grandma between college and law school, which was probably 2004, I came to talk to her about family history because, as you all know, she had the most knowledge of family history in all of cities. She knew everybody's family, especially ours. So I wanted to talk to her about it because I had taken an interest in it. And I came to spend some time with her, and we went to lunch. It was wonderful. And then afterwards, we went to Ben & Jerry's to get some ice cream, which was great. So we ordered our ice cream, we sat down, we ate it, and Grandma felt that the ice cream was too salty. And I hadn't really considered this before, but I guess you're right. You know, an ice cream should be a certain texture, it should be. She felt hers was too salty. So after we ate, it was perfectly fine, we had a lovely time. She went up to the 16-year-old ice cream scooper. And she said to the young man, she said, you know, this ice cream was too soft. And I really think that you guys need to figure out a way to fix that. And this young man, the 16-year-old, was very nice about it. He tried to be helpful, and he thanked her for her feedback, and we left. And I said to Grandma, you know, he's 16 years old. He certainly doesn't own the Ben & Jerry's. Ben & Jerry's, very big company. They have a lot of stores. My sense is that they are not overly concerned about whether your particular ice cream on a particular day was a little bit too soft for your particular liking. that's the kind of thing that many of us would just let go. And she turned to me and she was actually very indignant. She said when she was growing up, working for her father's store, again on West 6th, and I would reiterate, she was proud of the fact that she lived on the near west side of Cleveland, because in that time it was very atypical and certainly would still be atypical for a Jew to be living there. But when she was growing up in that store, she learned that the customer was always right. And even the littlest distinctions and littlest small differences might make all the difference to a particular customer, and we ought to learn from those things. And what's more important, how would it be possible for a store owner to become better unless somebody was telling them what they were doing wrong? And she actually took it to the next level. She didn't leave it there. It wasn't just that it was an important thing to share this feedback. It went beyond that. Store owners like it when people complain. And they like it because that's how they learn to become better. Now, I remain unconvinced that all store owners like to hear complaints. But I do remain persuaded that her case was correct. That there's no way to really improve and become better unless there's somebody out there telling us the little things and the big things that we're doing wrong and ought to be doing better. And that's certainly something I think she would agree with. Now, she was attentive to detail, very precise in what she was looking for. And there was a lot of ways she was that might be more traditionally well received. One thing that sticks out to me is her love for what I would refer to as all God's creatures. And I don't think that that was a phrase that she would have used, but it was something that I felt was pretty palpable when I was around her. She seemed to befriend the wild animals that lived near her house or wherever she was. When I was growing up and went to the house in Hazelmere, she had a habit or a practice of leaving peanuts out on the windowsill for the squirrels. And these squirrels would come up, and they would come right up to the windowsill and stuff these peanuts in their mouths and really enjoy eating them. And you could literally just go, hi, and they were just looking at you. And it was, I tell you, as an 8-year-old, 9-year-old, 10-year-old, this was an amazingly fun thing to do. And she would sit there looking and thinking this was hilarious and wonderful and just a great fun time. Now, my brothers reminded me last night, and I'm glad they did, that she actually took this one step a little bit further. She decided that it would be a good idea to rub lipstick on she would rub lipstick on peanuts and put them out. And her theory was that this was not theoretical. This actually happened on a regular basis. If the squirrel came and ate the peanut that had lipstick on it, the lipstick would get on the squirrel, in the mouth or whatever, and so there'd be a little red and cuteness, you know. And then, if a squirrel came back later that had the red lipstick, she knew she had a repeat customer. And how better to know that you had a satisfied customer than if they came back again. And again, there's no argument with that. She was a bit of a modern-day St. Francis. When she moved to R.H. Myers, one of the things I noticed was that when we would go outside, all the cats, the feral cats that kind of roamed around the grounds of R.H. Myers would come up to see her. They knew her because she would bring them little scraps or little treats or whatever. She was one of the few people who did that, and they knew that they could come to her to get these little things. And they would come up and they would purr and they would, rub up against her legs and whatnot. And again, these are wild cats that, otherwise didn't really want to be around people. But with her, they knew that they would get a little snack or a little treat. That made a pretty distinct impression. She was detailed and caring, and she expressed those things creatively. Rabbi Marcus shared some of those things. One of the things that I've enjoyed recently is I've been looking through some of her old scrapbooks, and I was impressed at the care that she put into them. She would find the most precise or little trinkets from an event or whatever to put in her scrapbook, so that it would add to that memory, bring that memory together. And it was little things, a napkin from this place that had the insignia of wherever it was she was visiting. Little pictures that you would otherwise not have thought of. But she put them in there, and it really does add to the feeling of being at that particular place and time. In her photo albums, she would caption her photos. Now, I know this is something a lot of people do. They'll put a little note of who's in the picture. Sometimes they'll even write a little something. But she made funny little phrases referencing what was happening in the photograph. There's a picture of her going down a slide where she goes, "Wee!" and it's written in big letters over the top of it. And she did this for all of her friends. And there seems to be instances where she had little inside jokes because they'd be in quotation marks. And I don't really know what she was getting at, but I'm sure they had an inside meaning. And when I showed these things to Hannah, she remarked that she was the Instagram queen before Instagram existed. And I really do only imagine the things she could have come up with, created, and the memories she would have preserved had she been around with the tools we have today, whether it be Pinterest, Instagram, Facebook, you name it, she would have used it and would have used it well. Maybe a little too much. She would have used it very well. As I mentioned before, it was the attention to detail that informed her interactions with the family and the community as well, and that's perhaps the most important thing. She was focused and acutely aware of her relationships to people and wanting to preserve the memories of those relationships with those people. I think we can all remember her sometimes a little bit annoying efforts to take pictures, even at slightly inopportune times. I certainly have a recollection of that a time or two. Again, been looking at the old photos, something I enjoy doing. I came across one recently that I might describe as not a real winner. It was Grandpa Stan's last Passover, and he was gravely ill and clearly not doing well at all. But he managed to get to the table to sit for the Passover. Nevertheless, he looked terrible, but Grandma took a picture of it and thought it was something that we really needed to preserve for posterity. I looked at it and thought, it seems a little unnecessary, but she wanted to maintain that memory. Now, that could be, again, a negative, but on the contrary side, nobody, and I mean no one, knew more about family history than she did. She knew her relatives near and far. She knew the community goings and comings. She knew what was going on. She soaked up those details, and most importantly, she wanted to preserve them. One day when I was probably 10 or 11, I really don't remember how old I was, but I have a distinct memory of it. We were sitting in the den, or the library, in the old house on Hazelmere. And if you recall, they had a lot of photo albums in that den. And I don't know what we were talking about, but somehow the topic came up of if our house was on fire and you could save but one thing, what would you take with you? And I don't remember what I said, and I'm sure it was something a 12-year-old would say. But she turned to me and she looked at me very seriously, and she said, I would take my photo albums. And I kind of probably laughed and said, why would you take your photo albums? Just pictures, who cares? And she looked at me again very seriously, and she said, because they are my memories. And it probably wasn't until recently that I understand that very well. I have a lot of other memories of grandmas, I'm sure all of you do. And I imagine there's probably variations on this theme. And maybe there's a lot that are different. But I think it's unlikely that anybody would have gone through life without noticing her attention to detail. And it's that reason that made the last few years pretty difficult, at least for me to see, because she wanted so much to preserve. But she couldn't do it at the end. So I'm happy she got to meet Sivan while she still had her faculties, because it was clear that she had developed a relationship and developed strong memories of Sivan, at least before the last few years. And I know that she had a very strong impression on Sivan that Sivan will take with her. And I think I'm particularly happy because Sivan seems to have received some of Grandma's very best qualities that I think we all value. Her attention to detail, her creativity, and perhaps most of all, her messiness. And that is why I'm hoping when we leave here, Sivan, you're going to go home and clean your room. Grandma Betty would want it that way. Grandma helped teach me the importance of knowing details, keeping memories alive. And though sometimes you might say she went a little bit too far, I don't know what we would be if we didn't have people like that in our family, in our communities. We love you very much, Grandma, and miss you very much. But most importantly, and I think what she would want is that we would hold her in our memories. So, thank you.
Thank you for your beautiful words. Let's pause for a moment of silence as we each remember Betty in our own hearts. Birth is a beginning, and death a destination. But life is a journey, a going, a growing from stage to stage, from childhood to maturity, and youth to age, from innocence to awareness, and ignorance to knowing, from foolishness to discretion, and perhaps to wisdom, from weakness to strength, or strength to weakness, and often back again. From health to sickness and back, we pray to health again. From offense to forgiveness, from loneliness to love, from joy to gratitude, from pain to compassion, and grief to understanding, from fear to faith, from defeat to defeat to defeat, until looking backward or ahead, we see victory lies not at some high place along the way, but having made the journey stage by stage, a sacred pilgrimage. Birth is a beginning, and death a destination, but life is a journey, a sacred pilgrimage made stage by stage to life everlasting. If you're able, please rise now for El Malay Rachamim. El Malay Rachamim, Shochen Bamromim, Ramsei Menocha Nechona Tachat Kanfei Hashchina, Im Kedoshim Tehorim, Gezoar Harakia Mazirim et Nishmat, Rana Malka Bat Shmuel V'Rocho, Shalacha La'olama, Baal Harachamim, Nasirechu Beseter Kenefav La'olamim, V'yitzur Bitzur Chachim et Nishmata, Raihu Nachalata, V'tanuach B'Shalom Al Mishkavav V'Nomar. Amen. Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to our beloved Betty Unger, who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let her find refuge in your eternal presence, and let her soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God is her inheritance. May she rest in peace, and let us all say, Amen. Please be seated for a few moments. This concludes our service here. We will proceed from here to Beit Olam Cemetery to join the family. Take Betty to the family together burial, and then following that, we'll be receiving visitors at Dan and Hannah's home, 2181 Halcyon Road, following burial until 8 p.m. this evening. Thank you. Thank you, Dan, for your